A city on the brink. The sun rises over Utica, casting long shadows across the harbor where ships bob gently against weathered stone quays. You can almost hear the creak of rope against wood, the gentle lap of Mediterranean waves, and beneath it all, something else. A tension that hangs in the morning air like the scent of salt and uncertainty. If you've ever stood at the edge of something ending, if you've felt that peculiar weight when everything familiar begins to shift beneath your feet, then you understand what the people of Utica felt in those final days of the Roman Republic. The year is 46 BCE, and the world they knew is coming apart at the seams. Picture, if you will, a merchant named Gaius. Not a great man by the standards of history. No statues would be carved in his honor. No poets would sing his name. But he carries weight, nonetheless. The weight of a business built over decades, of workers who depend on his grain shipments, of a family whose future rests in his weathered hands. This morning, Gaius stands in his warehouse, running his fingers through kernels of wheat from the fertile fields beyond the city walls. The grain feels solid, real, but everything else seems to be dissolving like morning mist. For months now, the news has grown darker. Caesar's legions march closer each day, and with them comes the end of everything Gaius has known. You see, Utica was more than just another North African port. It was a symbol, a living reminder of what Rome once stood for. Founded centuries earlier by Phoenician traders, it had grown into something remarkable. A place where Roman law meant something, where a man's word in the marketplace carried weight, where the old virtues, honor, duty, the courage to stand for what is right, still held meaning in an age when such things were becoming as rare as honest politicians. The weight Gaius carries this morning is familiar to anyone who has built something worth preserving. He thinks of his father, who taught him to judge grain by touch and smell, of the careful relationships built with farmers and ship captains, of the reputation earned one honest transaction at a time. All of it now hanging by the thinnest of threads. In the streets outside his warehouse, Gaius can hear the murmur of voices, worried conversations that stop when strangers approach. The city feels like a held breath. Market stalls that should be bustling with morning trade stand half-empty. Ships that might normally be loading cargo for Alexandria or Rome sit idle, their captains unwilling to risk the uncertain seas. But it's not just the immediate danger that weighs on Utica. It's what that danger represents. The collapse of something larger, something that once seemed as permanent as the stones beneath their feet. For this is the death throes of the Roman Republic, that grand experiment in governance that had lasted nearly 500 years, where power was shared, where laws mattered more than the whims of kings, is gasping its final breaths. Julius Caesar, once a servant of the Republic, has become its destroyer. His crossing of the Rubicon 6 years earlier was more than a military maneuver. It was the moment when ambition finally devoured principle. Now Caesar's forces, fresh from victories in Spain, are sweeping across North Africa like a tide that cannot be turned. And Utica, faithful Utica, which has remained loyal to the old ways, stands directly in their path. Gaius sets down his handful of grain and walks to the window overlooking the harbor. The morning light catches the white limestone of the buildings, giving the city an almost ethereal glow. How many mornings has he stood here, planning shipments, calculating profits, building what he hoped would last? The routine of it, the simple satisfaction of work well done, now feels precious beyond measure. This is something you understand, isn't it? That weight of responsibility that sits on your shoulders in the quiet hours, the knowledge that others depend on what you're building, the way uncertainty can transform even the most mundane decisions into acts of faith or courage. In the distance, Gaius can see movement on the roads leading into the city. Dust clouds that might be refugees, or scouts, or something worse. The news travels faster than the armies these days, carried by merchants and sailors who speak in hushed tones of cities that surrendered without a fight, of leaders who chose survival over principle. But Utica has chosen differently. The city fathers have cast their lot with the last defenders of the Republic, with Cato the Younger and his ragged band of senators and soldiers who refuse to bend the knee to Caesar. It's a choice that speaks to something deeper than mere politics. It's about what kind of world they want to leave behind. You've faced such choices yourself, haven't you? Moments when the easy path and the right path diverge, when standing for your principles might cost you everything you've built. The merchant Gaius faces such a moment now, as his city prepares for a siege it cannot win. The grain in his warehouse could feed families for months. His ships could carry him to safety in some distant port, where Caesar's name is just another rumor. But to leave now would be to abandon more than a business. It would be to abandon the idea that some things matter more than survival. As the morning progresses, Gaius notices changes in the rhythm of the city. Shutters that remain closed on houses that should be stirring to life. The absence of children's voices from the streets. The way conversations die when footsteps approach. Utica is holding its breath, waiting for news that everyone knows will come. And then, as if summoned by the city's need, word spreads through the streets like wildfire. Cato has arrived. Marcus Porcius Cato, the last true voice of the old republic, has come to Utica. For those who still believe in the possibility of honor, in an age of compromise, Cato's name carries almost mythical weight. Here is a man who has never bent, never yielded, never chosen the expedient over the right. In a world where principles are traded like commodities, he remains unbought and unbuyable. But his arrival brings both hope and dread. Hope, because his presence means Utica will not face its fate alone. Dread, because everyone knows what his presence truly signifies. Cato does not come to surrender. He does not come to negotiate. He comes to make a stand. And stands, by their very nature, are made to be final. Gaius feels this weight settle over the city like an approaching storm. In his warehouse, surrounded by the fruits of decades of honest labor, he understands that he is witnessing something larger than the fate of one North African port. He is watching the last act of a drama that began when the first Romans dared to imagine a world where power could be limited by law. The grain beneath his fingers suddenly feels different. Not just a commodity to be bought and sold, but something more precious, a connection to the land, to the cycles of planting and harvest that continue regardless of the ambitions of great men. There is comfort in this continuity, in the knowledge that some things endure, even when empires fall. Outside, the sun climbs higher, burning away the morning mist and revealing the city in sharp detail. The limestone walls that have protected Utica for centuries. The harbor where Phoenician traders first established their foothold in Africa. The temples where citizens have gathered to honor gods and ancestors for generations beyond counting. All of it now balanced on the edge of a knife, waiting for the arrival of forces that will determine not just the fate of a city, but the shape of the world to come. Caesar's legions carry more than weapons and siege engines. They carry a new way of being, a world where might makes right, where the will of one man matters more than the wisdom of many. But for now, in these last hours of the old world, Utica endures. Its people go about their morning routines with the quiet dignity of those who have chosen their path and will not be moved from it. In workshops and markets, in temples and homes, they tend to the small sacred tasks that give life meaning. Gaius returns to his grain, running it through his fingers like a prayer. Tomorrow will bring what it brings. Caesar's armies will arrive, and choices will be made that cannot be unmade. But this moment, this quiet morning in a city that refuses to surrender its soul, belongs to them. The weight you carry in your own life, the responsibility for what you're building, for those who depend on you, finds its echo in these ancient stones. Across more than 2,000 years, the fundamental challenges remain unchanged. How do we build something worthy of preservation? How do we stand for principle when the cost is high? How do we find meaning in the face of uncertainty? These questions hang in the air over Utica as surely as the morning sun hangs over the Mediterranean. And somewhere in the city, a man named Cato prepares to provide his own answer. An answer that will echo through history long after the last legion has marched home. The day is young, but already the shadows are beginning to lengthen. The weight of duty. The weight of command settles differently on different shoulders. For some, it becomes a burden that bends the spine. For others, a mantle that straightens it. As Cato moves through the narrow streets of Utica in the early morning light, his bearing suggests a man who has long since made peace with what he must carry. You know this feeling, don't you? That moment when you realize the decision rests entirely with you, when the comfortable illusion of shared responsibility falls away, and you stand alone with the consequences of what comes next. The weight you carry has prepared you for such moments, though you may not have recognized the preparation at the time. Cato pauses at the harbor's edge, watching the fishing boats return with their night's catch. The Mediterranean stretches endlessly before him, indifferent to the human drama unfolding along its shores. He has crossed this sea many times, as a young quester learning the machinery of governance, as a senator defending the old ways, as a general in a war that should never have been fought. The memories surface unbidden, as they do when we stand at crossroads. 3 years ago, when Caesar first crossed the Rubicon, Cato had been in Rome. He remembers the moment precisely. Standing in the Senate House as word arrived that the die was cast, that the Republic's greatest general had become its greatest threat. Others had spoken of negotiation, of compromise, of finding middle ground between Caesar's ambitions and Pompey's pride. But Cato had seen something they had not. He had seen that some bridges, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed, that some choices, once made, reshape the very ground on which we stand. What you're building requires this same clarity of vision, doesn't it? The ability to see not just what is expedient, but what is essential. The morning air carries the scent of salt and olive oil, bread baking in distant ovens, the countless small rituals that make up a city's awakening. Utica lives and breathes around him, trusting in his judgment, depending on his wisdom. The citizens who bow as he passes do not yet understand that they are greeting a man who may soon ask them to die for principles they have never questioned. This is the loneliness of leadership. Not the absence of people, but the presence of choices that cannot be shared. You feel this weight in your own life, in those quiet moments when the team has gone home and you sit alone with the decisions that will shape tomorrow. The buck, as they say, stops with you. Cato turns from the harbor and walks toward the citadel where his officers wait. Each step is measured, deliberate. He has learned, through years of public service, that a leader's composure becomes his followers' courage. Show doubt, and doubt spreads like fire through dry grass. Show fear, and fear becomes the enemy within your own walls. But composure is not the absence of doubt. It is doubt's transformation into resolve. As he climbs the stone steps, Cato carries with him every uncertainty, every question about the path ahead. The difference is that he has learned to bear these uncertainties without being broken by them. This is what the Stoics understood, that strength comes not from having no burdens, but from carrying them with dignity. In the citadel's main chamber, maps cover every surface. Troop positions, supply lines, defensive possibilities. The mathematics of a last stand rendered in ink and parchment. His officers look up as he enters, their faces reflecting the gravity of their situation. They command perhaps 15,000 men. Caesar approaches with 50,000. "Any word from Thapsus?" Cato asks, though he already knows the answer from their expressions. "Nothing, sir." The silence suggests that Scipio's army no longer exists. Cato finishes quietly. Another piece removed from the board, another hope extinguished. But his voice remains steady, his manner unchanged. This too is leadership, absorbing the blows so that others need not feel their full impact. The young tribune Marcus shifts uncomfortably. "Sir, if Caesar's forces are indeed that close, perhaps we should consider—" "Consider what, Marcus?" "Terms, sir. Honorable terms. Caesar has shown mercy before. He pardoned Cicero, welcomed back many who opposed him. Perhaps—" Cato studies the young man's face. He sees there the same hope that flickers in many hearts when the impossible becomes inevitable. The hope that somehow principles can be preserved without sacrifice, that dignity can be maintained without cost. It is a young man's hope, and Cato envies it even as he must extinguish it. "Tell me, Marcus, what terms preserve the Republic?" "Sir, what negotiation restores the Senate's authority? What compromise returns power to the people rather than concentrating it in one man's hands?" Cato's voice is gentle, but his words cut deep. Caesar offers mercy to individuals, not to institutions. He pardons persons, not principles. The room falls silent. This is the heart of it, the choice that cannot be avoided through clever diplomacy or tactical maneuvering. Some things cannot be negotiated away because they are not possessions to be traded. They are the very foundation on which everything else stands. You understand this in your own work, don't you? Those moments when someone suggests a shortcut that would compromise everything you're building. When the easy path reveals itself to be a betrayal of the very purpose that brought you this far. The weight you carry includes the responsibility to say no to such temptations, even when saying no means walking a harder road. A commotion in the courtyard below draws their attention. Through the window, they can see a small party approaching under a white banner. The lead rider wears the purple stripe of high rank, and even at this distance, Cato recognizes the bearing of Roman nobility. "Lucius Caesar," he says quietly. Caesar's cousin, his emissary, the man who has carried pardons to a dozen former enemies and seen them kneel in gratitude. Now he comes to Utica, no doubt bearing the same offer. Submit and live. Resist and face the consequences. The officers exchange glances. Here, perhaps, is the reprieve they have been hoping for, the chance to step back from the precipice with honor intact. But as they look to Cato for guidance, they see something in his expression that tells them the choice has already been made. Not made in this moment, but made long ago, in 100 small decisions that led to this one large one, made when he chose principle over expedience in the Senate, when he spoke truth to power regardless of the cost, when he decided that some things are worth more than survival. This is how character is built, isn't it? Not in grand gestures, but in daily choices. Not in moments of crisis, but in the quiet times when no one is watching. What you're building requires this same foundation, the accumulation of small integrities that prepare you for large ones. "Shall I receive him, sir?" asks the captain of the guard. Cato nods slowly. "Bring him to the main hall. Let him deliver Caesar's message with all due ceremony. Let no one say we lack courtesy toward our enemies." As the officers file out to make preparations, Cato remains at the window, watching the sun climb higher over Utica. The shadows that seemed so long at dawn are shortening now, and the day's heat is beginning to build. Soon, very soon, he will face the choice that has been approaching for 3 years. The choice between a life without honor and an honor that transcends life. The weight of duty settles more firmly on his shoulders, but he does not bend beneath it. Instead, he stands straighter, preparing to meet whatever comes with the dignity befitting a Roman senator, and a man who has learned that some things are worth any sacrifice. Echoes of principle. The emissary's footsteps echo through the stone corridors of the governor's residence, each measured step carrying the weight of empire. Lucius Caesar moves with the confidence of a man who has never been refused, who has never encountered a door that Caesar's name could not open. But here, in this sun-bleached city at the edge of the world, he is about to meet something rarer than victory itself. A man who cannot be bought, threatened, or reasoned into compromise. Gaius watches from the shadows of the courtyard as servants hurry past with wine and fresh bread. Even now, even with doom approaching like a desert storm, Cato insists on the proper courtesies. The old ways must be observed, not because they matter to the outcome, but because they matter to the soul. "He was always like this," one of the older senators murmurs to his companion as they wait in the antechamber. "Even as a young man, even when it cost him everything." The companion nods slowly. "I remember the praetorship, when Pompey and Crassus tried to bribe their way to the consulship. Every other senator took their gold and looked the other way. But Cato," he shakes his head. "Cato stood in the forum for hours, speaking against corruption until his voice gave out. They threatened him, offered him fortunes, promised him power. He never wavered." These are the echoes that follow Cato through these final hours, memories of a lifetime spent choosing the harder path. While other men bent with the winds of politics, he remained fixed like a lighthouse against the storm. While others accumulated wealth and influence, he accumulated something far more precious and far more dangerous: the absolute certainty that some principles are worth any price. You know this weight, don't you? The weight of holding to your values when compromise would be so much easier. When everyone around you is cutting corners, when the market rewards shortcuts, when investors push for growth at any cost. The weight of maintaining your integrity when the world seems designed to erode it, grain by grain, decision by decision. Cato learned early that character is not built in moments of crisis. It is revealed in them. Every small choice, every daily decision to do what is right rather than what is expedient, had been preparing him for this moment. the young man who had walked barefoot through Rome's streets in winter, refusing the comfort that might soften his resolve, had become the senator who could not be moved by Caesar's threats or Caesar's gold. In the courtyard, Gaius overhears fragments of conversation, stories told in hushed tones by men who had served alongside Cato for decades. The time he had given away his inheritance rather than see it used for corruption. The countless mornings he had risen before dawn to study philosophy, training his mind as rigorously as a gladiator trains his body. The way he had lived simply, almost austerely, in a city drunk on luxury and excess. The Stoics taught him well, another senator observes. He understood that we cannot control what happens to us, only how we respond to what happens to us. This is the philosophy that had shaped every decision, every stand, every refusal to compromise. External circumstances are like weather. They come and go, beyond our control. But our response, our character, our adherence to principle, these remain ours to command. Caesar might control armies, might reshape the very map of the world, but he could not touch the one thing that mattered most: the sovereignty of a free man's conscience. The wisdom Cato carried is the same wisdom that might serve you now, as you build something meaningful in a world that often rewards the meaningless. The understanding that what you're building is not just a company or an organization, it is a reflection of who you choose to be when the pressure mounts and the easy path beckons. Through the open windows, the sound of Caesar's approaching army grows clearer. The rhythmic march of legions, the creak of siege engines, the low rumble of 10,000 men moving with terrible purpose. The city's defenders know they are outnumbered, outmatched, perhaps doomed. But they also know something that Caesar's soldiers do not. They know they fight for something that cannot be conquered by force. Inside the residence, Cato prepares to meet with Lucius Caesar. He moves with the same deliberate calm he had shown in the Senate, the same measured dignity he had displayed when facing down mobs in the Forum. His hands are steady as he adjusts his toga. Not from lack of feeling, but from years of training himself to master feeling. Fear, anger, desperation. These are natural responses, but they need not be controlling responses. The Stoics had taught him to examine each emotion as it arose, to acknowledge it without being ruled by it. Yes, he feels the weight of responsibility for the men who have followed him here. Yes, he grieves for the republic that is dying around them. But these feelings, however intense, cannot be allowed to cloud his judgment or compromise his principles. What matters is not what he feels, but what he does with what he feels. Gaius finds himself thinking of his own small choices, his own daily decisions to maintain honor in a world of shifting loyalties, the grain he measures honestly when others add sand to increase their profits, the contracts he honors even when circumstances change, the workers he pays fairly even when he could exploit their desperation. These seem like small things compared to the great drama unfolding around him, but perhaps they are not so different from Cato's choices after all. Every principle is tested in the ordinary moments before it is tested in the extraordinary ones. Every character is forged in the daily workshop of small decisions before it is revealed in the crucible of crisis. What Cato faces now is not a sudden transformation, but the natural culmination of a lifetime spent preparing for this exact moment. The moment when principle and survival stand in absolute opposition, when the cost of integrity becomes everything a man has to give. The afternoon light slants through the windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Soon, very soon, the conversation that will determine everything will begin. Caesar's emissary waits with the patience of a man who believes the outcome is inevitable. After all, every other opponent has eventually seen reason, has eventually chosen survival over principle, pragmatism over idealism. But Cato is not every other opponent. He is the echo of an older Rome, a republic that valued virtue above victory, character above conquest. In him, the ancient ideals make their final stand, not with sword and shield, but with something far more powerful and far more fragile. The unshakable conviction that some things matter more than life itself. The weight he carries is the weight you carry. The responsibility of remaining true to your deepest values when the world offers every incentive to abandon them. The knowledge that what you're building must be built on foundations that will not shift, principles that will not bend, integrity that cannot be purchased at any price. A glimmer of hope, a shadow of doubt. The morning sun rises over Utica's walls, casting long shadows across the forum where life continues its ancient rhythm, even as the world prepares to end. Gaius moves through the marketplace, his practiced eye noting the subtle changes. The bread sellers still call their wares, but their voices carry a different timbre. The fishermen still spread their nets to dry, but their conversations drift toward darker shores. This is the peculiar nature of waiting. Life insists on continuing even when continuation seems impossible. Will Caesar truly offer terms? Asks Marcus, the wine merchant, his weathered hands sorting amphorae with automatic precision. His question hangs in the morning air like incense, heavy with hope and fear in equal measure. Gaius pauses in his counting of grain sacks. These are the conversations happening in every corner of your world too. When uncertainty clouds the horizon, and those who depend on you look for reassurance, you're not certain you can give. Cato will hear what Caesar has to say, he replies carefully. But hearing and accepting, those are different things entirely. The weight of leadership reveals itself not in grand gestures, but in these quiet moments, when ordinary people seek certainty from those who carry the burden of decision. You know this weight intimately. The way conversations pause when you enter a room, the way eyes turn to you when the path forward grows unclear. In the Senate House, Utica's leaders gather as they have for generations. The marble columns still stand straight, the bronze eagles still gleam. But something fundamental has shifted. Cato enters without ceremony, his simple toga a stark contrast to the ornate decorations that speak of better times. Citizens of Utica, his voice carries the measured cadence of a man who has spent a lifetime choosing his words with care. We face a choice that will define not only our fate, but our character. Caesar's emissary will arrive soon, bearing what he calls mercy. The senators shift in their seats. These are practical men, merchants, landowners, fathers with families to protect. They understand the mathematics of survival, the cold calculus that says compromise is often wisdom. But Cato continues, his gaze steady. I have spent my life believing that some things cannot be negotiated away. That integrity is not a luxury for peaceful times, but the very foundation upon which meaningful action rests. He pauses, allowing his words to settle. Today, we will discover whether that belief can survive contact with the ultimate test. This is the moment every leader dreads and must eventually face. When principles meet consequences, when the values you've proclaimed in easier times must prove their worth in the crucible of real decision. The weight you carry includes this terrible privilege, the responsibility of choosing not just what works, but what's right. Outside, the citizens of Utica go about their daily business with the strange intensity of people who know their world is ending. The baker kneads his dough with extra care, as if perfect bread might hold back the tide of change. Children play their games with fierce concentration, their laughter a defiant sound against the gathering storm. Gaius watches them from his warehouse door, these ordinary people caught in the machinery of history. They didn't choose this moment. It chose them, just as the moments that define your leadership rarely announce themselves with fanfare. They arrive disguised as ordinary days, routine decisions, conversations that seem insignificant until you realize they were everything. Will we fight? The question comes from young Quintus, barely old enough to hold a sword, but old enough to understand that his future hangs in the balance. The honest answer? The one that acknowledges uncertainty without abandoning hope. This is perhaps the hardest thing leadership demands. "We will do what honor requires," Gaius replies, surprising himself with how much he sounds like Cato. "And we will face the consequences of that choice with our heads held high." In the Senate, debate flows like water finding its course. Some argue for negotiation. These are not cowards, but men who have seen enough of war to know its true cost. Others speak of duty, of the republic their fathers built, of principles that cannot be bartered away like grain or wine. Cato listens to each voice with the attention it deserves. This, too, is leadership. The recognition that good people can reach different conclusions, that wisdom sometimes wears the mask of disagreement. But listening does not mean abandoning judgment. Understanding other perspectives does not require abandoning your own. "I have watched the Republic die by degrees," he says finally. Each compromise seemed reasonable at the time. Each accommodation appeared to serve the greater good. But principles are like walls. Remove enough stones, and the whole structure collapses, often when you least expect it. The room falls silent. These men understand structures, foundations, the importance of what cannot be seen. They are builders in their own right, of businesses, of families, of communities. They know that some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. "Caesar offers us life," Cato continues, his voice neither harsh nor gentle, simply true, but life on terms that make life meaningless. He offers us peace, but the peace of surrender, not the peace of justice. These are not small distinctions. They are everything. You know this tension intimately. The pull between what would be easier and what would be right. The weight you carry includes these impossible choices, these moments when the comfortable path and the correct path diverge completely. When the very thing you're building depends on decisions that might destroy it. The afternoon sun slants through the Senate House windows, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. Time moves differently in moments like these, each second stretched thin with possibility, each word carrying weight beyond its simple meaning. "We will hear Caesar's offer," Cato concludes. "We will give it the consideration that any proposal deserves. But we will remember that some things cannot be purchased. Some freedoms cannot be negotiated away. Some principles cannot bend without breaking entirely." The senators nod, though whether in agreement or resignation remains unclear. This is the loneliness of leadership. The knowledge that understanding your position and supporting it are not always the same thing. That even good people faced with impossible choices may choose differently than you would choose. As evening approaches, Utica settles into an uneasy quiet. The weight of tomorrow presses down like a physical thing, heavy, inescapable, but somehow also clarifying. In the face of ultimate tests, pretense falls away. What remains is what was always there, the core of who you are, the foundation of what you're building, the principles that define not just what you do, but who you become in the doing. Cato stands on the city walls, looking out toward the horizon where Caesar's legions wait. The last light of day catches on his weathered features, illuminating a face that has never learned to hide from difficult truths. Tomorrow will bring its test. But tonight, there is only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that whatever comes, it will be met with integrity intact. The weight he carries, the weight you carry, is not a burden to be escaped, but a responsibility to be embraced. The knowledge that what you're building matters enough to defend, even when, especially when, the cost of that defense cannot be calculated in advance. The inevitable choice. The morning brings no clarity, only the harsh light of consequence illuminating choices that seemed abstract in darkness. Cato stands in his study, Caesar's offer spread before him like a map of surrender, the parchment bearing words that could restore his property, his position, his comfortable place in a world remade. Clemency. The word tastes foreign on his tongue. Not mercy earned through justice, but forgiveness granted by power to power. The very concept offends something deeper than pride, something that recognizes the corruption hidden in such generosity. You know this feeling, don't you? When the easier path presents itself with perfect logic, dressed in reasonable arguments. When the voice in your head whispers that compromise isn't betrayal, it's adaptation. That what you're building can survive a small bend here, a minor accommodation there. That principles are luxuries for those who don't carry real responsibility. Cato moves to the window, watching Utica prepare for siege. Citizens board windows, merchants bury coin, mothers hold children closer. All because they chose to make this city a symbol, rather than simply another place Caesar conquered. The weight of their faith presses against his shoulders like a physical thing. In his mind, he holds conversations with the dead. With his great-grandfather, the elder Cato, whose rigid virtue became legend. "What would you do?" he asks the shade. But he knows the answer before it comes. The elder Cato would have fallen on his sword before reading Caesar's offer, let alone considering it. "But you never had to watch a city burn for your principles," Cato whispers to the morning air. "You never had to count the cost in other people's blood." The imagined response comes swift and cold. Every principle costs blood. The only question is whether it's your own. Across the city, Gaius the grain merchant makes his own calculations. Not philosophical ones, practical ones. How much food remains in the warehouses? How long the walls might hold? Whether his wife and children should flee now, while the roads remain open, or trust in Cato's defiance. He's lived through enough upheavals to know that principles, however noble, don't stop siege engines. That integrity, however pure, doesn't prevent famine. Yet something in Cato's bearing yesterday, something in the way the man carried himself, makes Gaius hesitate. "Perhaps," he tells his wife, as they pack what valuables they can carry, "perhaps some things are worth the risk." She looks at him with the practical wisdom of someone who's never had the luxury of philosophical idealism. Easy words from men who've never buried children. But she doesn't insist they leave immediately. Not yet. Back in his study, Cato reads Caesar's letter again. The language is careful, respectful even. No threats, no ultimatums. Simply an acknowledgement of past differences and an invitation to participate in Rome's future under new management. The offer is generous, suspiciously so. Caesar understands the power of conversion. A Cato who bends the knee validates every other surrender. It transforms the Republic's last defender into its final betrayer, making resistance seem not noble, but foolish. The psychological victory would be worth 10 legions. He knows exactly what he's asking, Cato murmurs. Not just submission, but the public abandonment of everything that made the request necessary in the first place. You feel this in your own choices, don't you? When the compromise being offered isn't just about changing direction, it's about admitting that the direction itself was wrong. When accepting the deal means declaring that what you're building, what you've sacrificed for, what others have trusted you to protect, was naive from the beginning. The afternoon brings visitors, senators, merchants, citizens, all seeking guidance, reassurance, permission to choose survival over symbolism. Cato receives them with the same measured courtesy he's shown throughout his life, but behind his eyes, something is settling into place. One young senator, barely old enough for the toga he wears, speaks with the desperate logic of someone who still believes problems have solutions. Caesar's offer extends to all of us. We could rebuild, serve Rome in new ways. The Republic was dying anyway. Perhaps this is evolution, not death. Cato studies the young man's face, seeing his own son's features reflected there. The eager hope that wisdom and compromise might yet save everyone, that the weight of impossible choices might be lifted through clever negotiation. Tell me, Cato says gently, what do you think we've been defending? The Republic, our way of life, Roman values. And if we accept Caesar's terms, what happens to those things? The young senator struggles for an answer that doesn't exist. They adapt. They survive in new forms. Do they? Cato's voice remains soft, but something final has entered it. Or do we simply call our surrender by prettier names? As evening approaches, Cato dismisses his guards, his advisors, his well-meaning friends. The choice that seemed impossible in daylight has become inevitable in darkness. Not because the options have changed, but because he finally understands what he's really being asked to choose between. Not life or death, not comfort or hardship, not even victory or defeat, but between the man he's spent 60 years becoming and the man Caesar's world would make him. He thinks of you, lying awake in your own darkness, facing your own version of this choice. When the offer comes that could solve all your problems, but only by abandoning what made solving them matter. When the path forward requires you to betray not just your plans, but the person who made those plans. The weight you carry isn't just responsibility for what you're building. It's responsibility for who you become while building it. And sometimes the only way to honor that weight is to refuse to set it down, especially when carrying it becomes impossible. Outside his window, Utica settles into an uneasy quiet. Tomorrow will bring Caesar's legions, and with them, the end of this particular story. But tonight, in the space between choice and consequence, there is something that feels almost like peace. The peace of knowing that whatever comes next, it will come to a man who remained himself until the end, who chose the weight of his convictions over the comfort of their abandonment, who understood that some things, some essential, irreplaceable things, can only be preserved by those willing to die with them. The grain merchant secures his shutters. The young senator writes letters to a family he may never see again. The city holds its breath. And Cato. Cato finally stops weighing options and begins preparing for morning. The final stand. The morning comes with unusual stillness. No trumpets sound from the citadel. No messengers race through the streets with urgent dispatches. The silence itself carries the news before any words need be spoken. Cato has given his answer. You know this feeling, don't you? That moment when a decision crystallizes, when all the weighing and measuring falls away, and you simply know. Not because the path is easy, but because it's yours. Because everything you've built, everything you truly are, leads to this single point of choice. The young senator finds Gaius at dawn, securing the last of his grain stores. Neither man speaks of what they both understand. Caesar's generous offer lies rejected in the governor's palace. The most practical solution, the one that would save lives, preserve the city, ensure survival, has been set aside. He could have lived, the senator whispers, more to himself than to Gaius. Caesar would have honored his word. Cato could have retired to his books, his philosophy. He could have. But Gaius shakes his head slowly. He's spent these past days watching, listening, understanding something his younger friend has yet to grasp. No, he says quietly. He couldn't have. Not and remained Cato. This is the weight you carry, isn't it? Not just the decisions themselves, but the knowledge of who those decisions make you. Every choice, every moment when you choose the harder path because it's the right one, builds something inside you that cannot be undone. A structure of character that becomes stronger than survival itself. The news spreads through Utica like water finding its level. No proclamations, no dramatic announcements, just the quiet understanding that their defender has chosen to remain exactly what he's always been. The citizens who plan to flee with Caesar's advance find themselves pausing, reconsidering, not because Cato's choice makes their own easier, but because it reminds them of something they'd almost forgotten. What it means to be irreducible. In the marketplace, an elderly woman continues selling bread she knows she may never be paid for. A craftsman finishes a piece he'll likely never deliver. Small acts of completion, of integrity maintained even when the world is ending. They don't speak of Cato directly, but his choice echoes through theirs. The young senator asks the question that hangs in the air. What does it accomplish? This gesture? Gaius considers this as he watches the city around them. Shopkeepers opening their doors. Children playing in the squares despite everything. Life continuing not because it's safe, but because it's what life does. Perhaps, he says finally, it accomplishes nothing at all. And perhaps that's exactly the point. You understand this, don't you? In your own moments of impossible choice, when doing the right thing serves no strategic purpose, advances no agenda, protects no advantage, when integrity becomes its own reason, when what you're building matters more than whether you survive to see it completed. The afternoon brings a different quality of light, softer somehow, as if the very air has settled into acceptance. Cato walks through the city one final time, and those who see him, they don't see a man preparing to die. They see someone who has finally stopped fighting himself. The weight of choice has lifted. The burden of possibility has been set down. What remains is simply what remains. A young mother tends her garden, knowing Caesar's army approaches. A merchant calculates accounts he may never collect. A soldier sharpens weapons for a battle that may never come. Not because these actions will change anything, but because they are who these people choose to be in this moment. This is what Cato's decision has given them. Not salvation, but permission to be themselves completely. without reservation, without compromise, to meet whatever comes as exactly who they are. The grain merchant finds himself thinking of seeds, how they carry within themselves everything they will become, how the tree is already present in the acorn, waiting not for safety or certainty, but simply for the right moment to reveal what was always there. As evening approaches, Cato returns to his quarters. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a man who has finished his work, who has chosen to remain faithful to the thing he's spent a lifetime building, even when, especially when, that faithfulness costs everything. The city settles into twilight. Tomorrow will bring what it brings. But tonight, there is something irreducible in the air. Something that cannot be conquered or pardoned or negotiated away. The knowledge that some things endure not because they survive, but because they remain unchanged by the prospect of ending. What you're building, what you truly are, exists in these moments of choice. When the easy path beckons and you choose the true one instead. When you become irreducible. Legacy of Utica. And so the night deepens over Utica. As Cato sits in his chamber, surrounded by the scrolls of Plato, the words of the Phaedo open before him like a map to undiscovered country. The oil lamp flickers, casting dancing shadows on walls that have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the coming and going of men who thought themselves eternal. Outside, the city sleeps fitfully. Gaius, the grain merchant, lies beside his wife, listening to her quiet breathing, thinking of the choice that awaits them all at dawn. Will they flee? Will they surrender? Or will they follow their governor into whatever lies beyond the reach of Caesar's mercy? But in this moment, in this gentle space between decision and consequence, there is something profound settling over Utica, like morning mist over still water. Cato reads slowly, his finger tracing the ancient Greek letters that speak of the soul's journey beyond the body's limitations. These are not new ideas to him. He has carried them for decades, through the forums of Rome, through the bitter debates of the Senate, through all the small compromises he refused to make when others bent like reeds in the wind. The weight you carry tonight, it is not so different from what he carried then. The knowledge that what you build with integrity creates something that transcends the immediate, something that outlasts the quarterly reports and the market downturns and the moments when everyone else chooses the expedient path. He sets the scroll aside and walks to his window. Beyond the city walls, the African desert stretches endlessly under stars that have watched civilizations bloom and wither like flowers in an eternal garden. Rome will endure for centuries more. Caesar will become a god in men's minds, but something else will endure too. Something quieter, more persistent. The memory of a man who chose to remain himself when the world offered every reason to become someone else. In the hours that follow, Cato completes his final act of defiance. Not in anger, not in despair, but with the calm certainty of someone who has found the one thing that cannot be taken from him: his principles, his irreducible self, the man he chose to become through 10,000 small decisions to do what was right rather than what was easy. And when dawn breaks over Utica, when Caesar's legions arrive to find their greatest enemy beyond the reach of either punishment or pardon, something extraordinary happens. The story doesn't end. It begins. For in the years that follow, in the decades and centuries that stretch ahead, like an unwritten scroll, men and women will remember, not the details of his final moments, but the larger truth they represented, that there exists within each of us something that no external force can touch. Something that remains constant, whether we succeed or fail, whether we are praised or forgotten, whether the venture we're building thrives or crumbles. The knowledge that we chose to be who we truly are. Seneca will write of him. Shakespeare will put his story on the stage. And 2,000 years later, in boardrooms and coffee shops, and in the quiet moments before sleep, people will still understand what he chose and why it mattered. You see, what you're building isn't just a company or a product or a legacy measured in metrics. It's something far more enduring, with each decision to treat people fairly when you could exploit them, with each choice to speak truth when lies would be more profitable, with each moment you refuse to compromise your core values for temporary advantage. You're building something irreducible, something that exists not because it survives, but because it remains unchanged by the prospect of not surviving. The desert wind that blew across Utica that night still blows across the ruins today. The stars that witnessed Cato's final choice still wheel overhead in their eternal dance. And somewhere in the space between what was and what is, between the weight of responsibility and the lightness of letting go, his example continues to whisper the same quiet truth, that integrity is not about the outcomes we achieve, but about the person we choose to remain, regardless of what outcomes await us. The weight you carry, it is not a burden to be discarded, but a responsibility to be honored. What you're building through your choices, through your refusal to compromise what matters most, through your commitment to remain yourself when the world offers every incentive to become someone else. This creates something that echoes across time like ripples spreading outward from a stone dropped in still water. Tonight, as sleep finally comes, as your mind releases its grip on tomorrow's challenges and next quarter's projections and all the urgent concerns that will still be there in the morning, let yourself rest in this ancient truth that Cato discovered in his final hours, that some things endure not because they are strong enough to survive everything, but because they are true enough to remain unchanged by anything. And in choosing to build something irreducible within yourself, you join a conversation that began in the desert wind over Utica and continues in every quiet moment when someone chooses principle over profit, integrity over expedience, the person they truly are over the person the world wants them to become.